Welcome to the Voices of a Stranger podcast. Here is your host, Reza Garajadaki.
Buddy, welcome to another episode of the Voices of a Stranger. I'm your host, Reza Garajadaki, and I'm super excited today because we have another incredible story of survival. Again, somebody who is very, very lucky to be alive. I have my friend Brick here, who's going to introduce himself and tell you what happened to him. And he was just sleeping, and him and his wife were, fast asleep. And the next thing you know, somebody broke into their house. And what happened to him, when he first told me the story, I literally had my jaws all the way down to my shoes. So, Brick, I'm going to stop talking. I want to introduce you to our guest. So please tell us about yourself, where you're from, and kind of what happened to you to bring you to this day.
Perfect. Thanks, Reza. And thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to share this story, mainly because to me, when we go through these types of tragedies, it's important that they have purpose behind them, a positive purpose. And that's how we get through trauma. And that's my firm belief and what studies I have. So this is part of my healing process, is to be able to come on to these types of situations and share.
Sure.
But just to really put in perspective the story and how it rolls out, I kind of have to go back to high school, which is even, 5-6 years before the home invasion happened. And, here I am, I got this crazy tough name, Brickman, right? I grew up cowboy, training horses, my parents, getting bucked off a horse, my parents saying, you know what, I know you're crying. I know you don't want to, but you're getting back on the horse, right? So I was kind of in this unique dynamic growing up where I was just this tough kid and was taught that fear actually helps us in our progression if we go and face the fear and kind of just head on like a bull, just go after it, right?
Sure.
Which is interesting because that happened when I was younger. And then when I entered high school, here I am, Brickman, this tough kid, but I'm only 5 feet tall and 100 pounds.
Wow.
I'm the littlest guy on campus with the biggest name, right? And what it does is it creates this atmosphere where I was an easy target for bullies because I wouldn't back down, but they could pick me up and throw me across the room, right? And in fact, funny story is that in the middle of class one time I would daydream. Like I was just this big daydreamer and I'm sitting there just kind of staring off into space. And all of a sudden, next thing I know is somebody's walking across the classroom telling me to stop staring at him. I had no idea I was staring at him. But he's like, stop staring at me. And by the time I figured out what was going on, he had reached me and had picked me up and started to choke me out until I almost blacked out.
Wow.
Like in the middle of class. Like it was kind of insane. But that process of just getting back in the saddle every single time, the cowboy mentality of toughen up, put the grit into it, keep pushing through. And I learned a lot about myself. I learned I can handle a lot, and I can handle it with a smile on my face. And that became kind of crucial to this story because, so I graduated high school. When I graduated high school, I actually loved high school. Started out the smallest kid in campus. I graduated 6 foot and 180 pounds. So now I lived up to my name and I could stand up for others. I could stand up for myself, and I loved high school. And so I kind of, with my parents' help, found this unique place where I could find difficulty and turn it into something positive, not only for me, but for other people.
Sure.
Well, fast forward a few years, and my wife and I were married for 1 year and 1 month. And my wife is 5.5 months pregnant. And this man walking through the neighborhood sees the garage door, sees it open, sees this as an opportunity. And so he walks into our house, just walks right in, opens the inner door to the house through the garage, picks up my wife's purse, and starts going.
Let me ask you, where was this located in?
Mesa, Arizona.
Okay.
Yeah. So the craziest thing about it is I live about 2 miles away from where this happened. So I didn't go very far, but he came in my house and we laughed because he grabbed my wife's purse and sat down on our living room sofa and ate M&Ms, going through my wife's purse for money. And then when he didn't find the money he wanted, he actually took 2 handfuls of M&Ms and put them in his pockets. And then he walks into the kitchen, takes off his shoes, and goes through all the drawers, and he finds the biggest knife he can, which is an 8-inch butcher knife, an 8-inch chef's knife.
Wow.
And he's just mad at this point, and, just angry at the world, angry at life, angry at his circumstance. And so he creeps into the bedroom, and filled with this anger, he stabs me in the chest with that knife.
Unbelievable.
with such force that he buried it to the handle and broke 2 ribs. And that's when I wake up, right? And my wife's screaming and kicking at him. And all I know is that there's somebody above me. I don't really know that I've even been injured at this point. But my wife and I shove him off the bed, and his foot fortunately gets stuck in some drywall. And so he's struggling to get up as my wife grabs a cell phone and starts running down the hall away from him. And he starts to get up to go after her and starts yelling about how he's going to kill us.
Jesus.
And the other thing my parents taught me about being a cowboy is the cowboy was the white knight of the American West. And so they taught me that they always showed respect to women and children, like big time. And they always stood up for those that couldn't stand up for themselves. I mean, I grew up watching John Wayne and
Right, yeah.
Clint
Me
Eastwood,
too, yeah.
Right? One of my favorite movies is The Magnificent Seven. These guys come in, they're just this ragtag bunch, and they protect those that can't. So that's how I was raised. Well, when he said he was going after my wife, something clicked in my brain. And I just went full on cowboy mode. I'm going to protect those that I love and those that are vulnerable. And somehow I came off the bed after being stabbed in the chest, and I had to grab the knife by the blade, and we spent 3 minutes fighting over this knife. And in that time frame, my wife calls 911. The paramedics, the police, they're on their way. I hear at the 3 minutes, and I know this because we have the 911 call. At the 3-minute mark, you can hear on my wife's cell phone the sirens. And I remember hearing those sirens, and I have the guy pinned to the floor, and I'm trying to figure out what I can do to get him to leave, and I pass out from the loss of blood. And this guy gets out from underneath me, stabs me 2 more times in the back, and then runs. And I come to, and I'm fighting to be conscious because I roll over to see where he's going. And as I'm looking to see where he's going, I see he's running away from where I know my wife is at. And I know that she's safe because he's passed by the room that she locked herself in. But this is when I'm looking down past towards my feet as I'm laying on the ground, and I see the blood pumping out of my chest. And so that's where I started losing consciousness in and out. And it was just this crazy process of flashes of memory, seeing SWAT come in with their shields and then paramedics are coming in, and then I'm on a stretcher and I'm being taken out of the house and rushed off to the hospital. But through all of this, I'm just sitting there thinking, where's my wife? Is she safe? Is she okay? And man, I love first responders. I mean, I've always wanted to be a first responder. I always wanted to be in the military. Just wasn't in the card for me, right? But there was some amazing people there. One of them, this police officer takes my wife, and he says, "Hey, we want you to feel safe. This is a lot scary going on." So he takes her and he takes her to his police cruiser, and he starts the engine. He puts her in the driver's seat. He says, "If you get scared, just put it in drive and drive until you feel safe. We'll find you. Go find family, whatever it is, just be there." And she was determined to see me come out to see if I was going to be okay. And I remember being wheeled by that police car and looking over at our eyes meeting and thinking there was this big sigh of relief. And I started to just kind of give up the fight. I was like, okay, she's safe. I did my job. And paramedics started yelling at me, "You've got to fight for your wife. Can't stop fighting. Keep going." And they really kept me in the mental state of getting back on the horse, of just fighting through it, facing the fear and just going on. And so it was just this amazing thing where the right people were in the right place at the right time in every respect of the word. And Riz, I know you've got a wide audience, and I love it. I love that you got a wide audience. But I believe in higher power. Now, you can call that higher power whatever you want. I think it's the same individual. I think it's the same power. I call him God. I call him my Heavenly Father. Whatever you call him, my thought process and my knowledge is that he plays an active role. He doesn't just sit there on this throne in the clouds and looks down on us and just kind of lets us go through life. He has an invested interest in us, and he wants us to be happy and succeed. And so when all this was going down, this higher power God, I feel he put the right people in the right place.
Right.
So that's that's the initial part of the story. And
Right.
then and that's the attack. And so what I'll do right now, Rez, is of course just give a little
Yeah.
pause and see if there's any questions you have up to this point.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, how lucky that you were in an area where the police were there in 3 minutes. I mean, that's the first thing that I thought about. That, I mean, if it was any longer, you might have bled out, probably. You know.
Well, and give the credit. I got to give credit to my wife. My wife, when she called 911, she literally somehow dialed 911 while running down the hall. Again, 5.5 months pregnant. And
Oh,
the
that's
first
right.
thing somebody says, 911, what's your emergency? She says, my address is this. Somebody is attacking my husband in my house. Send help now.
No.
And so within 10 seconds of them picking up, they had already dispatched somebody. It was
Now,
not just amazing how she did that. I don't know how she was so calm and collected.
That's amazing. Well, Brick, the other thing you had mentioned to me when we first talked is that you have heard that 911 tape, a few times, and the emotion of that was very overwhelming.
Oh, it's crazy. My wife was literally at the very end when she thought the man had gone and left. And the 911 operator says the paramedic, the police are arriving. They'll be there within 15 seconds. You can hear my wife just crying and saying, I hear him yelling out to me. I hear him calling my name.
But
And she was just bawling, and my heart breaks every time I hear it. And the paramedic was awesome. She says, look, he's done everything to protect you. If you leave that room now, you've destroyed everything he's done for you.
That's awesome.
So stay there. That's what he wants. And just let him do his job. Right. So, but yeah, it's heartbreaking to hear, my beautiful, amazing wife of 1 year just in this state of distress. And I can't do anything to take that from her. Right. I can't bear that burden for her, per se.
Well, it sounds like, something that we watch on one of those TV shows or ambulance shows or crime shows. I mean, and you described a scene. Everyone listening or watching is probably can create that image in their mind. So now tell me about, you were airlifted, right?
Yeah. So I'm airlifted. And so in the state of Arizona, we have part of our state is called Scottsdale in the Phoenix area.
Right.
If you ever want to see the biggest homes, the most beautiful cars, the richest people, you go to Scottsdale.
I've been there, yes.
Yeah, it's like California Beverly Hills, right? Sure. And amazingly, they put me in this airvac and they start flying me to Scottsdale Memorial Hospital. Now, I mean, you think about it, if it's a hospital in a rich area, you've got to have state-of-the-art equipment.
Correct.
The best way I can explain it is the hospital has, or at the time had, a 2-story water fountain waterfall off the side of the building in the desert of Arizona, right?
Wow.
This is how much money this hospital has. And we're flying towards this hospital, and I'm in and out of consciousness, and I come out of consciousness, and all of a sudden I hear these 2 helicopter pilots. They're yelling back and forth, and one goes, Scottsdale's gone dark. Scottsdale's gone dark. Scottsdale's not responding. And we found out later that Scottsdale had nobody in the emergency room, not a single person in there. It was just a ghost town. But because they couldn't get them to respond, to prepare them and tell them what I needed, they were flying towards this hospital and don't know what to do. And all of a sudden, I hear one of them yell, Maricopa, I've got Maricopa. And so we bank, and I felt the bank, and I pass out, and we go to a place called Maricopa County Hospital.
Sure.
Now, Reza, if you want to envision something the complete opposite of an oasis in the desert,
yeah,
it is Maricopa County Hospital. You can't walk up to the front of the hospital without walking past homeless people. And you can't walk down the halls of that hospital without passing 1 or 2 inmates with chains around their wrists and ankles because they got injured in the prison and were sent there to get healed. And so going from one to the other, you would think, man, Brick, you got dealt a bad hand at that moment, right? But it's amazing,
and no waterfall.
And no waterfall, right? I don't get that joyous, like, as I'm healing, the tranquility of the water falling, right?
Right.
But what's amazing to me again is that I don't believe in coincidences. We land at this hospital, and they bring me into the ER, and there's a trauma nurse, and that she's in charge of kind of assigning everything out and getting everything together in this emergency room. And she grabs 2 ER surgeons, and they just happen to be standing in the hall right there. She says, I need you now. And she throws them in the operating room with me. And they go in. The first thing they do is they assess. And when the initial attack happened, he actually went instead of going straight into my body, he went downward at a downward angle from my chest to my belly button. So he went through lung, diaphragm, and into my liver.
Jesus.
And so when they opened me up, they realized that lung, that he had pretty much sliced off a third of that lung. So your lung is actually made up of lobes, and you can survive with less of a lung. And so what they did is they took that third lobe on my right side and they just removed it and sealed that lung back up.
Wow.
And then the diaphragm they were able to repair, but the liver was like at 10 or 15% functionality.
Right.
So the other thing is about the liver though is that as long as it's healthy, it'll regenerate to 100% normal. So amazing organ. And so they decide that what they're going to do is they're going to leave an incision in my stomach open so they can monitor that healing of that liver. And then they put me on life support. Basically, the way I best can describe it, they put 33 units of blood into me. My body only holds 9. So literally bled out over 3 times. They have 3 tubes in my side removing internal bleeding. They have me on a respirator where the machine is breathing for me 75% of the time. So every 4 breaths I take, 3 of those breaths were machine originated. And they put me in an induced coma and they come out to talk to my family. And so that's where I'm kind of at, is I'm literally on life support. I flatlined a couple of times through the whole process, and just in this absolute state of, does anybody think I'm going to survive?
Yeah.
The amazing thing about it though, Reza, is these 2 surgeons, they actually came from the burn unit. And the burn unit in Maricopa County Hospital is world renowned for handling trauma. They're better than almost anybody in the world. They send doctors from all over the world to train at Maricopa County Hospital. And these 2 surgeons were the most tenured surgeons in this trauma center. One that had been there for 15 plus years, the other one 12 plus years. And in all those years, they had never once operated on the same individual together until I showed up that day. And they just happened to be in the hallway at the right time, at the right place. Timing is everything. And like I said, I don't believe in coincidences. And so they were able to put me in this position of life, being on life support and basically take me from death to, there's a slight chance that I might survive.
You had mentioned that your father had asked one of the doctors, and you had said something like 10% chance. Remember when you told me that?
Yeah. So the amazing thing is that these surgeons come out and they handle these situations where they literally have people's lives in their hands all the time.
Sure.
And they learn a lot from that. So the first one, he comes out and he approaches my family and he says, look, let's gather who you need to. Let's go say our goodbyes. We don't think your son and your husband and your brother is going to make it through the night. And my family just breaks down. I mean, they realize that this is just not going, it's not going the direction they were hoping. And the second surgeon, we call him the nice surgeon. He took a little bit of pity on my family. And so he says, well, can I ask you some questions about him? And maybe we can, maybe there's something more to it. And he turns to my mother and says, tell me about your son's health choices. Well, in high school, and Rez, I didn't tell you this before, it's one of those like embarrassing secret, whatever. I was the mascot in my high school. Right. And so I'm the only guy in my high school that people would call the cheerleader. And this was 20 plus years ago. This was not cool to be a cheerleader / mascot in a high school.
Yeah.
Right. But my mom, knowing, and I was the mascot because I was a gymnast and I worked really hard on being very physically fit. Sure. So she starts going in and explaining to him about how I did gymnastics and all this stuff. And he goes, no, he says, look, I've actually operated on hundreds and hundreds of men in their 20s. And I can tell your son doesn't drink alcohol. I can tell that he doesn't smoke, and he's probably never done either one of those things. And my mom says, no, he doesn't. He doesn't even like taking painkillers. He says, because we're dealing with the liver and the lung, I would say there's a slight chance he'll survive. And my dad says, what does that mean? He says, maybe 10%.
Wow. I mean, 10%.
10%. And that's all they would give me. And that's the hope and just perspective and optimism that my family took hold on, was that 10%.
Now you have some pictures, I think, of your recovery you're going to share with us. You had told me earlier.
So if you haven't yet, go to Reza's YouTube channel, because he puts everything on video if you're listening to this for audio, but I'll describe some of these pictures for you. So the first one is me actually on life support, and you can see all these bandages across my chest. You can see the tube going into my nose, my throat, to helping me breathe, helping me eat, putting blood into my system. They actually have one that goes right into the jugular to put the blood in. I mean, that's the best way they could do it. So kind of crazy. So if the picture is me in a hospital bed in this induced coma. Then now the next picture is of some of the scars. And so if you don't like scars, then you don't need to.
Look away.
But yeah, look away. So you got a scar that goes down my stomach, and Reza's closing his eyes a little bit, everybody.
I'm squeamish. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's these are the days that I left the hospital. You can see the bandage where the initial stabbing came in, and then you can actually see what the scars look like mostly today. Right. Like 74 plus staples. Now, the funny thing is, Reza, I didn't have any kids at the time, and I've got 4 kids now. My oldest is now 19. My youngest is 12. For the longest time, we didn't tell our kids the story.
Sure.
But I just got to tell you, so my son, my oldest, when he was about 8 years old, 9 years old, we were swimming, and I could see that he was kind of recognizing Dad's stomach and chest doesn't look like everybody else's. It's got these scars on it. And I look over, and his name's Rockwell, right? So talk about cursing your kid. My name's Brickman. I got a son named Rockwell. But anyways, he's looking at the scars. I said, Rockwell, do you know where Dad got his scars? And he just kind of paused for a second. He nods his head yes. And I thought, oh boy, maybe one of my brothers told him the story. I wasn't quite ready for him to hear it. And I said, well, can you tell me where Dad got his scars from? And he paused for a moment, and he took a deep breath, and he goes, well, Dad, everybody knows that one time when you were swimming in the ocean and the shark came out from underneath and just reached up and grabbed you. And so for the longest time, he was letting me tell everybody that I was attacked by a shark, because to me
they look like shark bites.
They're pretty bad. And so
that's amazing.
For a while,
how long was your recovery after? Obviously you were in the hospital. So how long were you, let's say, in the hospital right after this happened?
So let me tell you why I went back and I started talking about the bullying, right? And how this plays into it. So initially what they said is I have 10% chance to live. And if I come out of my induced coma, my chances increase to 50%. And so 3 days later, I'm brought out of my induced coma. The liver, the amazing organ that it is, healed itself 90% overnight, right? I attribute that to a lot of prayers of faith to this higher power of God. I also attribute it to the fact that the liver is just amazing. That's how we were made. This organ is awesome. And so it really just changed almost overnight. They stitched me up. My breathing started to level out. They took me off the breathing machine. I kept breathing on my own. And so they brought me out of the coma. And so on day 3, the doctors come in and I'm talking to them and I said, okay, now what's next? And they said, well, it's going to be about 6 months worth of rehabilitation. What you have to do is you got to get up and move as much as possible. And we're going to do this breathing machine that what it does is it's going to induce coughing fits to get fluid out of your lungs. Cause that's our biggest fear is pneumonia, and laying down is going to bring on the pneumonia and getting that coughing helps clear it out. Well, when they went in to do surgery, they actually broke 2 more ribs. So now I have 4 broken ribs, and they want me to do these coughing fits. Oh,
the pain.
And, yeah. I can tell you that on 2 different occasions I blacked out from the pain.
I'm sure, yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal. But the interesting thing is the doctor said, okay, what we're going to have you do is once a day we're going to have you stand up and walk, and then one time at night, and one time during the day. A little bit later in the day we'll bring in the breathing machine, and then sometime in the night we'll bring in the breathing machine. So you're doing this twice a day. And I said, okay, what do I have to do to leave? And he says, well, you have to be able to blow into this breathing machine for a certain amount of time without coughing. And then you have to walk the entire upper floor of the burn unit. They put me in the burn unit because they didn't know who my attacker was. And so they put me at highest level of security. And so you couldn't get into the burn unit unless you gave a password. You couldn't even call a hospital and ask for me by name. It was just this really unique situation. So the doctor leaves. And I'm sitting there thinking about it. And I'm like, well, I was taught that we don't shy away from pain. We don't shy away from fear. We lean into it. And so I hit the call button. I called the nurse and I said, nurse, let's talk about my schedule. When are you guys going to come in and help me get up for the first time? And when are we going to do this breathing machine? She says, well, we're going to come and start that in 12 hours. I said, okay, can we, instead of doing it every 12 hours for each one, let's do it every 6 hours for each one. She goes, wait, so you want to get up 4 times and try to walk 4 times in a day, and you want us to bring the breathing machine 4 times in a day? I said, as long as I can handle it, yeah. Like, there's no point. I'm going to push myself as hard as I can.
Sure.
And so what happened, what's interesting about healing and about misery and about despair is, the best way that I can tell you about despair and misery is it's like darkness. The more that we focus on that darkness, the longer it takes for us to recover. They say laughter is the best medicine, right? That's because those endorphins kick in and these amazing things happen in our body for healing. And what I learned in high school was, at my deepest moment, when I was suicidal, had suicidal thoughts and was struggling to see any purpose in my life, I had this teacher that taught me about the power of our minds and taught about how we can change our perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But it first has to come about changing our perspective about ourselves.
Sure.
Right? So if I'm telling myself there's no way I'm going to be able to do this, I can't do this. I can't get up and walk twice a day. I've just put a disability on myself. But if I go to the nurse and say, hey, I can do this 4 times a day, and I want you to help me do it, right? I'm now changing my perspective in my voice, in the way I talk, and the way I present myself.
Yeah.
Right? So the first key for this is that I learned in high school that I have more power within me than the outside forces going inward. And an amazing teacher taught me this, and just really taught me the ability to look at myself and to see the positive in what I can accomplish. And it's kind of a funny story, because the way he did this is he challenged me that for 30 days, I needed to look myself in the mirror every day and tell myself something new, something positive, and something honest about myself. And at the beginning of this, here I am, this 5 foot tall, 100-pound, scrawny little dude with a tough name, looking in the mirror, trying to figure out anything that is awesome, that is great. And I remember the first couple of days, I'm just like, Brick, you're a nice guy. Right? But the amazing thing about doing a 30-day challenge like this, and people call it words of affirmation, but to me, the words of affirmation are very repetitive. You don't dig deep enough, right? It's very surface level. When you've got to come up with 30 different things over the course of 30 days, you start to analyze yourself. And I remember, like 2 or 3 weeks in, looking in the mirror and winking and saying I'm a chick magnet. I mean, I don't know where that came from, but all of a sudden I started seeing myself not as the ugly duckling, right? The next thing I did was, I remember looking in the mirror and flexing and saying that I'm strong. I'm the strongest guy I know. And the truthfulness of that was not in my physique, it was in my mental toughness. And I learned that. But it was amazing that as I got closer to the end, I started to realize that anybody would be lucky to be my friend. I'm like this diehard loyal, I will fight to the ends of the earth to protect you. I am the Samwise Gamgee or whatever his name is, right? I'm that guy. Like, I'm going to support you through it all. And I learned the power of being a great friend and somebody who, instead of looking at everything that's bad and, oh, poor me, what am I going through? I started to look around and see all these other kids that were suffering in high school and being like, hey, that person can be my friend. And making friends with all these different people. So as I'm in this hospital room and I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, okay, I got to be positive about this. I'm going to talk about how I can do this. I'm going to tell everybody, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this. And then as I started walking the halls, because it took me 2 or 3 days before I could even stand up and leave my room, what I noticed was all these nurses were surrounded by burn victims. Now, burn victims have some of the greatest pain.
Yeah.
And when you have pain like that, again, you're in darkness and despair and you're not happy. And I noticed that some of these nurses were fighting through tears and emotion of just hard days. And so when I started walking the halls, I'd actually smile to the nurses and actually say hi to them and ask them, how are you doing? Today's such a great day. And I started talking like that. And that power of positivity and happiness just became this thing I needed in the hallways. And so every time I'd walk the hallways, these nurses would actually seek me out to say hi and just have a smile on their face. And it gave me this power to go further than I probably could have gone. And I started this mantra of I was just going to try to go one more door. Like, I would go as far as I could, and then I'd try to go one more door, because doors were about 10 feet apart.
Sure.
And so that's what I was trying to do. But it was like every time I get to that 10 feet, that last door, there'd be a nurse there and be like, Brick, you're doing amazing. You got this. And I'm like, okay, hey, they're watching me. I've got one more door in me.
Wow.
And I'd go one more door. And then I'd get there and I'd look back and I'd be like, oh man, I got to go back to my bed. How am I
It's
going to
time.
get there?
Right.
And then these nurses would step in and they would literally carry me
Sure.
back to my bed. So the amazing thing is because of this teaching that I learned in
High
my
school.
youth, and then in high school, and how my parents and these amazing teachers taught me all these things, I went from being in the hospital for 6 months. I walked out in 9 days.
That's amazing.
And,
Wow.
and it's not all on me. It's not all on me. I couldn't have done that alone. It was those amazing nurses. It was the power of positivity, the power of just recognizing that we are our own greatest disability, and that if we lean into it with positivity, everything changes.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a lot of things. I mean, you were a good athlete. You didn't drink, didn't smoke. You can even tell from the pictures. You could tell you were physically strong. Also, you were at a good age. I mean,
Yeah.
you were. So I think there was a lot, and more. The most important thing, besides the physical, was your own mental strength and these lessons going back to your teacher. And it's an amazing story. One question I'm sure a lot of listeners are thinking: whatever happened to the person who attacked you? Was he ever caught?
So he got away for about 15 years. They
Okay.
finally caught him off DNA. You mentioned it sounds like one of these stories from like NCIS, right? Or
Sure.
whatever.
Right.
The crazy thing is 20 years ago to process DNA was very expensive and it was time consuming.
Sure.
So they took his shoes and they put them in a freezer.
Oh, he left. His shoes were left at your
He
house.
left his shoes, so that's the DNA they got.
Right.
And so they just left. So they took those, put them in a freezer. They tried running them in the system, but the system was pretty new back in the early 2000s, and didn't get a hit. Well, this gentleman, he'd actually been in and out of prison for most of his life, but he was doing smaller crimes, and so they never had a reason to run his DNA.
Sure.
Until one day he got out of prison and something happened in an area he was in, and they thought he might have done it. So they ran his DNA and they're like, no, didn't do that. But what's this? It's pinging off of this 15-year-old cold case.
Wow.
And that's how they caught him.
That's it. So now he's probably incarcerated, hopefully, for the rest of his life. It sounds like
he did a plea deal for 20 years. So
wow.
he's got some time.
That's amazing. So the other thing I wanted to say is that obviously this is a major event in your life. Some people have these events. Your wife and you obviously have 4 kids. What is besides the message of staying positive, which I mean you're like the king of it. I mean I can't imagine trying to be as positive as you were when I'm barely can walk and I have these wounds. What is your message to people in general as far as dealing with adversity?
I think that what it is, okay, so I'm this cowboy guy, right? Usually I got a cowboy hat on. When you think cowboy, you think tough, gruff. I think that we hurt ourselves by not being vulnerable and looking outward.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just what it comes down to. So I see this experience as one of the greatest blessings in my life.
Sure.
And it wasn't easy. We lost our house. My wife actually had a stillborn child from that child she was carrying because of the stress and the hardship. I mean, just everything. Our life was destroyed. But people started asking me questions, and instead of just going inward and guarding it all and going into darkness and into myself, I started saying, hey, how can this help other people? How can my story be a positive thing?
Sure.
And so I've been blessed that I've traveled all over the world for the last 20 years, sharing my story and teaching mostly teenagers how to find that positive perspective and how to break through those feelings of inadequacy and even suicidal thoughts to stand a little bit taller and a little bit stronger. And again, it comes down to the way we speak about ourselves and the way that we speak about others.
Yep. And especially right now, I think with all the social media, with the teens, they don't communicate with each other. They're all buried in their phones, and you have children. So I think it's a wonderful message. It's so great that you go out and, hopefully with this podcast I have audiences all over the world. I'm originally from Iran. I lived in India, as you know.
That's
and
awesome.
I have friends all over Europe. So I was looking at the analysis of my first couple of videos. YouTube has this, and they were like people in New Zealand and Germany. I'm like, Wow.
It's amazing.
I got audiences all over the world. So this
Yeah.
is a universal message, especially in times like this with all the crime and all the stuff that's going on in our country with politics and all this, negative stuff. It's so great to have a speaker like you. And again, let's be honest, you're lucky to be alive.
Without a doubt. Again, I think it's what's the amazing thing is my mother taught me to find purpose in everything, right? So, Reza, I'll get in front of a high school in an auditorium, and every kid comes in there to hear me speak, and all you see out of 80% of them is the glow of their cell phone on their face
Yep.
with their head down.
Yep.
And I think the reason why I went through this hard, crazy, just mind-blowing experience is that and it's awesome. I say, and then the guy stabbed me in the chest, and you see every single head in
Yep.
the audience look up.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that I've got 30 seconds to grab their attention and keep
Sure.
them captivated to teach them something, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that in our lives, we all have that shock story. We all have amazing stories, and we all have an ability to use those amazing stories to teach others how to get through hardships.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's really the essence of this podcast, The Voice of a Stranger. My professor, Dr. Walter Capps, who had this class at UCSB, every week there would be amazing speakers. I mean, you would have been an amazing speaker. 860 students, and and every speaker had these incredible stories. And everyone left like, wow, I need to change the way I think and how I deal with personal adversity. So I know your story is going to be very well received. I really appreciate you being here, and I hope our listeners will be able to get something out of it. Now, I will be posting the pictures of what Brick showed about his time in the hospital on the Instagram and Twitter and on my Facebook page. And also, if you do want to reach out to Brick, please reach out to the Voice of a Stranger, and we would love to get you in touch with him. Brick, do you have a webpage or Instagram or anything that you would want to share?
Couple places where you can reach out to me, and I'd love to come and speak to anybody. I speak to corporations, but my passion are teenagers. I love speaking to teenagers. So if you want to have me come speak to your school or whatever, you can reach me on my website, brickmanallen@gmail.com.
Okay.
My Instagram is TheRealBrickman. And in fact, within 2 weeks of this, my first book is going to be published. I'm self-publishing through Amazon this time, but it's called The Bully Guard, and it has nothing to do with my home invasion. It's all about my high school experiences, and it's a book for teenagers to recognize through my story what they're experiencing and those little tricks and things that I've learned that can help them overcome what they're facing in their life.
That's
so there's a
awesome.
couple different places you can find me, but anybody who wants to reach out and ask me questions, I love talking to people. This is why I do this, Reza. I think this is why you do it. It's just so fun to talk to people.
Yeah, absolutely,
and to hear their story.
Yeah. And we'll put all those links in the description of these videos and all the different areas. So, again, thank you so much. I know when our mutual friend Seth called me and said, Reza, you got to get Brick on your show. And when I first talked to you, I'm like, this is a brand new podcast. We've only had a couple episodes, but such a great honor and pleasure to have someone like you. And as I said, I think I know your story is going to vibrate with many, many people around the world. So again, Brick, thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you again. Take care. All right.
Thank you so much, Reza. Thank you. And thank you for doing this podcast to share this message. Amazing.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Stay tuned for our next episode next week of The Voice of a Stranger. And please subscribe. And if you like this video, leave comments and press that like button. Take care, everyone. God bless.
Thanks for joining us this week. Please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, or on your webpage at thevoicesofastranger.com. If you enjoyed the show, please tell a friend and subscribe to the show. Tune in next week for a new guest. Until next time, keep living life with passion and make each day count.